Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Mad Mamluks podcast. My name is Sim. Alongside me is Shaykh Amir Saeed. We do not have Mahin on this episode today because he is out of town and unable to attend for this podcast. He has not been fired, as many of you guys always like to assume, you know, whenever one of our shows is missing a host, there's always theories that are popping up like, oh, he was probably too hot, or the Mad Mamluks sold out and they can't handle different voices anymore. It's not the case. He's just out of town. We're really excited for today's episode. We have a very distinguished and well-known guest that many people around the world know of, and I think many people in America are getting to know as well.
We wanted to pick his brain for a long time.
Right. He's a debater. He's a writer, author, and a person who is very well known in debate circles around the subject of the belief in a creator. Right. So, without further ado, please welcome Hamza Tzortzis. Assalamu alaikum, brother Hamza.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys?
Alhamdulillah. How about you?
I could never complain. Anything above a heartbeat is a bonus.
You know, I've been wanting you on a show for so long because you were a mentor of ours in many ways, at least when I was younger, and trying to understand, trying to make sure that I get my ideas sorted out, and you never know, like when you're halfway across the world, or you're not necessarily halfway, but you're 6 hours or 7 hour flight.
You were our murabbi and you didn't even know it.
Yeah. So we we've been getting a lot of the UK brothers on because they were one of our inspirations, and they had so much of an effect on us when we were young. So we want to help, make that bridge across the Atlantic and make sure that a lot of the young Muslims in America understand what a lot of the benefits that the UK brothers have to offer. And not to toot our own horn, we've also got a pretty big following in the UK. I was looking at the geographic stats of the UK just a couple days ago, and we have listeners literally in every town in the UK. It seems like. So, yeah, alhamdulillah, we're pretty excited about that. So we're going to be bringing out much more guests from the UK as well.
Brilliant. Keep up the great work. May Allah preserve you and bless you, and check your intentions. Make sure the sound and the align to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think it's just going to progress from there, inshallah.
Inshallah. So, Brother Hamza, you just recently came out with this book called Divine Reality. And I wanted to make sure that we hit this book early in the episode because for people who don't listen to the entire episode, I want to make sure that we get into this book early and kind of explore it a little bit, because I feel strongly, I know Shaykh Amir is a teacher of students in his high school, Islamic high school, and he wants to utilize this book in his curriculum as well. So talk to us about how you came to this book, because I think this book is almost a manual for a lot of Muslims who are kind of engaging in this kind of dialogue.
Yeah, so this originates from my own history. So I converted to Islam around 15 years ago, alhamdulillah. And I went through a journey because I had this kind of zeal and this passion, this love for sharing things that I loved. And in this case, it was Islam. I would pick up anything to try to articulate a compassionate and intelligent case for Islam to the world. Obviously, due to immaturity and age, I think, and maybe lack of experience, I just was dabbling with everything, and sometimes would pick an argument from a Christian philosopher, and sometimes would basically trying to make my own arguments up and trying to talk. And you have to understand, when I became Muslim in the early noughties, 2002, there wasn't this kind of social media, YouTube, Facebook, the way we have it now. And we didn't have like institutes that, were very popular in teaching the masses about what Islam is about. So I was relatively alone, if you want to call it that. And so I was just doing trial and error. And this book essentially is trying to show to people that you don't have to learn things the hard way, and that my trial and error and my mistakes and my errors and stuff like that, you could find lessons from my life and the way I've developed ideas. And essentially what the book is about is articulating a very strong case for the Islamic aqidah, the Islamic intellectual basis, if you like. It talks about God's existence. It talks about the proof of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It talks about even the miracle of the Quran, the linguistic miracle of the Quran, and how to articulate it to a non-Arab audience without requiring any knowledge of the Arabic language. And I refer to things like the inference to the best explanation, the concept of testimony, which is a foundational and valid source of knowledge, and this is well known even in Western epistemology. So, and for me, the most important chapter is why Allah deserves worship, because you could prove that the Creator exists until the cows come home, but if you don't show people that there is a necessary spiritual, existential, intellectual link between the affirmation that there is a Creator for the entire universe and everything that exists, and that Creator now deserves worship, which means to know God, to love God, to obey God, and to direct all acts of worship to Him alone, then, if you don't show that link, then frankly, we're doing a bad job.
Right. And you had direct experience with this. I remember watching a video of yours where you were kind of talking about your early years and how you arrived at Islam, and you did all the groundwork, right? You came to the intellectual belief in a creator before you accepted Islam, because I remember you were talking about having so much difficulty in accepting Islam even after coming to the belief in the creator. Like you knew that the creator existed, but you just couldn't really, like, there was like another component that was missing, right?
Yeah. I remember you mentioning inside of the book, you said that you were intellectually confident, but your heart felt dead or something like that.
Yeah, that was exactly it. So, look, what we have to understand is this. The human being is not a functional computerized model, okay? We're not just intellectual beings. We're not just a mind and a brain. There is more to us. We have a fitrah. We have a ruh. We have an innate disposition. We have a soul. We have the spiritual component. And it's very important that we see the human being as the human being. But sometimes when we try to articulate things, or we try to articulate Islam to other people, we see the human being as an abstract, functional, computerized model that you give them some kind of rational algorithm, and we think all of a sudden that's going to basically, give them iman. I mean, this is wrong, absolutely wrong, and it goes against all of our tradition about what the concept of guidance is and who guides, right? And it goes against the concept of what the human being is and what the role of reason is in our tradition. So it's very important to understand that. I think one of the reasons why I was going through this mess was because I was approaching the religion, or people came to me to approach Islam. And when they tried to articulate Islam to me, they wanted to say to me, hey, look, here's proof of God, here's proof of the Prophet, here's proof of the Quran, now you must become a Muslim. Well, not really. Many people already know that smoking is bad for them, but they still smoke. Many people know what good food is, but they still eat rubbish food. They know, for example, how to bring up great kids. If you were to write things down, right? Any parent could write how to be a good parent, down. And I know this from my experience. I have children, but are we the best parents all the time? No. So the human beings always have this kind of gap between what they know in an abstract sense and who they are and their state of being. And the problem is that sometimes we think if you give people abstract knowledge about here's the creator, here's the prophet, here's proof of the Quran, then all of a sudden that's going to change their state of being. That's not the case. And we see this in every reality. We have people who, medics who deal with cancer, and some of them smoke, right? And they know smoking causes cancer. They have all the physical facts on smoking and cancer, and yet it doesn't change their state of being. So, and we have to be very careful. So what I'm trying to say here is, I was approaching Islam, or Islam was approached to me. It was given to me by others in a very abstract intellectual way. It was enough maybe to convince my mind in an abstract, functional, computerized, algorithmic way, if you like. But it wasn't enough to settle in my heart, which was the most important thing, and for it to resonate and for me to internalize that. And that was the problem, because I think many people who articulate Islam to the wider community, to our brothers and sisters in humanity, they do so in a very kind of abstract way. And they forget what our tradition teaches us about what the human being is. Now, as you know, the human being has an innate disposition. This is known in our tradition. It's called the Fitrah, coming from the triliteral stem, fatara. So you have words like fatrun and fatarahu, like something has been created within us to acknowledge Allah and to praise Him. So there's a form of primary knowledge, proto-knowledge contained within us. It's already there. It's the fact that we acknowledge Allah, and that, there's a kind of capacity or an affinity, or the fact that Allah deserves praise. Now, what happens to the fitrah, according to the hadith in Sahih Muslim, as you know, every child is born in a state of fitrah, but his parents change him, etc. There's a socialization effect. There's, things that cloud the fitrah. So the fitrah can get clouded because of sin, because of negative experiences, because of wrong knowledge, because of parenting, because of the societal effects, whatever the case may be. Our job is to help people uncloud the fitrah, so we can awaken, or they can awaken the truth within them. Because the truth exists in every single human being. Every single human being.
Right. But the problem is, nowadays we're experiencing challenges that are being brought forward to young Muslims. I know, like, I'm a father of a couple teenagers, and they're being challenged with, all kinds of philosophical questions. And their fitrah had no problems in terms of their belief in the Creator. But when they're experiencing questions on the academic level or just among peers, they're finding themselves stumped. And I know, like you talked about, when you were arriving at Islam with a strictly intellectual level, myself and Shaykh Amir, when we were growing up, our first experiences with Islamic movements were, just like that. We were literally the first chapter. What we learned was what's called the way to believe. Like, you have to go through understanding man, life, the universe, and everything around you, and then you come to the belief in the Creator. And it was a very logical progression. And at the time, I was like, "Oh, this is fantastic!" And as time moved on, and we went off into learning other Islamic schools of thought, we're like, "Oh, well, that was kind of unnecessary, and that's not really required." But then, over the past few years, as the rhetoric from the neo-atheism crowd has kind of ramped up, you kind of went back to those days, and you're like, wait, these guys were onto something.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you look at a lot of the founders of the movements, they were dealing with things that were really communism related, right?
Communism, yeah.
Yeah, they were struggling with how to answer the red wave that was kind of taking over the Muslim world. And I think that they were onto something. I think we need to tweak their message a little bit and kind of structure it a little bit for this this day. What do you think about that?
What's important to understand is no one is belittling reason now. Yeah, what we're saying is, if you understand this is the human being, as the human being has been created with the fitrah, it can get clouded. Then how do you uncloud the fitrah? So good, sound arguments, reason can uncloud the fitrah for sure. But this model shows us that reason doesn't become an end; it's a means to awaken the truth within. And you find Allah, through His wisdom and mercy, would not allow you to use reason to articulate a rational argument to someone, and that would actually uncloud their fitrah. You know what may work? It may be just getting them direct access to revelation. They read the Quran, and that could just uncloud the fitrah. How many people do we know that they've only become Muslim not because of some kind of abstract philosophical argumentation, because they've had a direct existential connection with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning. So, and this is important. So that was the means that awakened the truth within for that particular person. It might not even be that. It might be negative experiences. It might be positive experiences. It might be spiritual experiences. It might be just thinking, right? How many times does Allah give us questions but doesn't give us the answer, right? It's implied. Doesn't give us the direct answer. It's as if Allah is saying to us, if you ask these questions, and you have a sincere heart, it would inevitably lead to the right answers. Take, for example, the questions about the creator of the heavens and the earth. Did you come from nothing? Did you create yourself? Did you create the heavens and the earth? بَلْ لَا يُقِنُونَ. Indeed, you have no firm belief. Allah doesn't even say, therefore, a creator exists. He's giving us questions, getting us to think. And if you learn how to think, and many people don't know how to think, unfortunately, if you learn how to think properly, it would inevitably lead to the right answer. So you're right, there is a place for rational discourse and discussion. But how far do you go? And do you start with that foundationally? I find it a huge problem to, as Al-Ghazali, look at Al-Ghazali. He was the 11th century theologian. Look at his journey. His life needs to be magnified for us. Because if you look at his history concerning philosophy and then his kind of existential experiences, maybe towards the middle to later part of his life, he made it very clear that if your iman, your spiritual conviction, is contingent upon some kind of deductive argument with a set of premises and a conclusion, then if someone smarter than you comes along and tweaks some of your premises, right? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? So his view was that, yes, this is a necessary medicine for those people who are already intellectually sick, but you don't give this to everybody who are already sound. And that was his view on what you call ilm al-kalam. And he understood that it had a place, but it had a place for specific people. You don't give it to someone who's healthy. Like, you don't give medicine to people who are already healthy. So, and that's why I said you shouldn't start with this foundationally. It can create a problem. Because what you do is you highlight and you focus on the abstract rationalizations, and then, what really counts, which is the connection with Allah and understanding that He deserves worship, and that existential experience being there and being very real for them. If that's not there, then when a question does come, they're going to have doubts. I mean, look, let's be very real. Yeah. Can we answer all the questions? Can Hamza Tzortzis answer all the questions? Absolutely not. Can you answer all the questions, Sheikh?
Absolutely not.
Exactly. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you see my point.
Of course.
So, what are we expecting here? Are we expecting someone to know all the answers to all the questions, or even to know all the philosophies? And I'm going to be very honest with you. The books that we started with, like The Way to Believe, they would be considered from a postgraduate philosophical perspective, shallow now, right?
Right.
Even though they were studied, I'm going to be very honest, they would be seen as shallow. You tweak a few presuppositions, and then the whole thing's fallen. It drops on the floor, the whole argument. I'm not saying we don't have strong arguments. We do have very strong arguments, just like I mentioned in the book. But we have to start with the right first principles, because everything has a metaphysical first principle. You can't run away with starting with something that you cannot prove. This is almost very basic in philosophy, right? You pick anything. Even we have to assume how we understand reason, how we understand rationality. We have to assume even the very fact that this external world is external to our minds, for example. Look. Let me give you, look, everything has first principles or assumptions or necessary assumptions that are required in order for that sphere of knowledge to grow. For example, science. Science has a presupposition of nature is uniform. If you don't have that presupposition, you cannot have any science. And you need it before you do any science. Science cannot prove it, right?
Right.
For example, here's a crude example. We've observed gravity in 50% of the universe, right? If we assume nature is uniform, therefore gravity pervades the whole universe. Very simple, right? And that's how science works. Science also works with the presupposition or the first principle of causality, that you need to believe in external causal connections, okay? Generally speaking, although there is a movement that some people just say, no, just focus on what the data gives you, then you can even deny, truths like causality. But that's neither here or there. Let's take the mainstream. You need to understand that there are external causal connections in the world, that there are causes and there are effects. This cannot be proven scientifically. You need to start with it as an assumption. Now, I'm not saying, causes can't be proven or effects can't be proven, because they could be observed in some way. I'm talking about the causal link. What the causal link between the so-called cause and the effect? How do you prove that? You can't. This you have to stop using science and go into metaphysics and philosophy and start to delve into the kind of quagmire of doubt and discussion concerning what on earth is causality. And by the way, in metaphysics, they haven't really solved the problem. What is a cause and what's the causal link, for example? Yeah, there's still debates about this.
Right.
So the point here is you need to have that as a first principle. Even neuroscience has a first principle. For example, the neuroscience, generally most neuroscientists and neuroscience itself rests on a non-scientific principle, non-scientific first principle, non-scientific philosophical assumption, which is the assumption of physicalism. What is physicalism? Physicalism is the view or the philosophical approach that all phenomena can be reduced to physical processes, but not necessarily little bits of matter. So the point here is they have to assume that, because when they start saying, look, we found consciousness in the brain, they haven't really found consciousness in the brain, because neuroscience is a science of correlations. They've seen, something happening, someone's reporting in a subjective conscious state, and then they see something happening in the brain, some neurochemicals firing, like, oh, there you go, we found consciousness. No, you haven't. You only found it if your assumption is true. What's the assumption? That what's happening in the brain is identical to your inner subjective conscious experiences. And that you can't prove. You can't prove they're identical in any way. That's a philosophical discussion. And that's where you have different approaches to physicalism. You have reductive materialism. By the way, materialism and physicalism is used synonymously in the philosophy of the mind. So you have reductive materialism, you have functionalism, you have emergent materialism, the hard version, the soft version. Anyway, I don't want to bore people. The point here is everything has first principles. Let me give you another first principle. In politics, in the concept of freedom, I did a specialist module for my postgrad called The Idea of Freedom. And we were talking about what is freedom. So there is a consensus amongst philosophers that freedom is not instrumental. It is not a means to an end, right? Rather, it is intrinsically valuable. So I raised a silly question. I said, well, how do you know? I said, well, if it's intrinsically valuable, the proof is not required. So I just changed my question. I said, well, how do you ground that? And the academic responded by saying, it's our intuitions. It's our philosophical intuitions.
Nice.
Wow.
So
he said, that's all we have. Listen to me, brothers and sisters, whoever's listening to this. Don't be duped by clever things on Google, YouTube, and stuff. Everything has first principles, and you could reduce a hell of a lot of philosophy on what you call intuitions. So when we talk about the Fitrah, we have an innate disposition with the belief that Allah is a reality and that He deserves praise. Then don't think that's some kind of hocus pocus made up stuff. It's what you call a necessary first principle that is required to understand who you are as a human being and to understand the whole world. Now, if you take other first principles, a lot of them are incoherent. They have to inevitably make you deny who you are as a human being. But we could discuss that a bit later. So the point I was trying to make here is everything has first principle. And the Islamic first principle, if you want to call it that, is the concept of the fitrah. We are human beings. And we have a fitrah that is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has forms of primary knowledge or proto-knowledge. Ulama talk about 2, but they also talk about 3, but there's a bit of ikhtilaf on the third. The first is that they already acknowledge some kind of prior causal connections, prior creative activity, a creator for the heavens and the earth. The other one is that Allah deserves praise, or this creator deserves some form of praise. Okay? And it's quite interesting that we praise people all the time by virtue of their attributes, even though their attributes are limited and deficient, which is very interesting. You're talking about Anthony Joshua, the boxer, just before we went live, and hopefully we might talk about that in a few minutes. But, when you see his sporting skill, his boxing skill, you're like, wow, that was amazing. Why? Why are you praising him? He's not benefiting you in any way, but you're praising him by virtue of his sporting attributes, right?
Yeah.
Although his sporting attributes are limited and deficient, right? And what does that mean about how we must praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whose names and attributes are not limited and not deficient, and they're perfect? Anyway, the point here is, so, we have an affinity to praise the creator. The third one is a form of proto knowledge, is basic moral truths. Basic moral truths. Not all moral knowledge, but basic moral truths, like stealing is killing is. So if the fitrah contains these things, and that becomes clouded as per the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we mentioned previously, that can be found in Sahih Muslim, then our job now is to uncloud the fitrah. So when you engage in intellectual discourse, right, know that there is a limit to this kind of intellectual gymnastics. There is only so far you can go when you split the intellectual hair. I remember I was speaking to someone. I gave him a really good argument for God's existence, right? You know, I just really love what I call the Quranic argument for God's existence. This is the one that he mentioned in the book. It's based on chapter 52, verse 35 to 36. So the logic of the verses are basically extracted and applied into the universe, right? Anyway, so I gave him that argument, and then he responds with something that doesn't really undermine, in essence, you know, the fact that a creator exists. And he replied by saying, well, what was God doing for eternity before he created the universe? Now, for me, we need to become more intellectually and spiritually mature and understand that question doesn't require an answer.
That question does not what?
Doesn't require an answer.
Doesn't require an answer, of course, yes.
Yeah, I tell you why, because it's a qarina, it's an indicator for a psycho-social spiritual issue that the person has.
Exactly.
Because why is that person raising the epistemic bar when it just comes to God? But for everything else in their life, everything, marriage, finances, banking, education, studies, everything else that they do, even if they claim to be a scientist, even what they consider as a well-confirmed theory, right? Everything that they do in their life, in every sphere of their life, academic, non-academic, social, whatever the case may be, the epistemic bar is on a certain level. But only for God, and only for God, right? Only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the epistemic bar is like way up there. So my question is, why the inconsistency? Why the gap? Why does that happen? Because there is something else that's going on. Don't assume that human beings are just functional computerized robots. We're not. There is an existential component there. There is a psychological component there. And that's why, you know, I really respect David Hume, because when he talked about morality, he basically said, there's no rationality in morality. We just use reason to justify what already, you know, our moral inclinations, our emotions. That's what we do. The basis for rationality, the basis for morality is not rationality. Rather, it's like the other way around. We're emotional. And we have emotional connections to so-called moral truths, and we just rationalize them, right? And you could extend that thesis to things like this, you know. Some people don't like the idea of God. They're not really atheists. They're closet meso-theists. They hate God. You know, others, they've had very dark experiences when it comes to religion. Maybe they need a Muslim just to buy him a pizza, for God's sake. But we're talking about cosmological arguments, and all this person wants is a Muslim to just say, you know what? Let's connect. Like, wallahi, brothers, yeah, and Shaykh, do apologize. We have to understand that, you know, there is so much more than just, you know, intellectual arguments. Because I'm going to be very honest with you. And this is my, what I would call maybe progress is not a very good word to use, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. If tomorrow something comes up, right, and there's a philosophical argument I don't understand, and like the majority of the philosophers say, that's it, God's existence is impossible. Inshallah, and you know, I don't want Allah to test me with my words, but that's not going to bother me. Why would that bother me? That would only bother me if I believe my iman is contingent on some kind of abstract deductive argument, for example.
Yes. My
iman now is contingent on, you know, my state of being, my heart, my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How many times have I spoken to an apostate, and I gave them an amazing argument, but in the process of me giving them the amazing argument, I didn't even like the argument, and I was in doubt about the same thing he was in doubt about. And yet that person came back to Islam, and I was still wondering in doubt. And I was thinking to myself, what is wrong with you, Hamza? It's like there are 50 people in one.
Wow.
Looking at myself thinking, why is that the case? Why are you Hamza here and Hamza there? There's Hamza number 1 over here. There's Hamza number 2 over here. Every couple of hours you become someone different. What is going on with you? And I'm going to be very honest with you. It was because I was not connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I lacked in my salah in terms of the way I was praying. I lacked in my izkar, my remembrance of Allah. And this just brings back the ayah. Allah says, if you forget Allah, Allah will make you forget yourself.
SubhanAllah. Yeah.
Our identity, internal identity, is contingent on our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not belittling reason here. Allah says, He gives us the conclusive argument. Absolutely. But the point I need to make everyone realize, inshallah, is that we're not just functional computerized robots. There's so much more to us than that. And reason basically is a means to awaken, to uncloud the fitrah, to awaken the truth within. And every single Muslim, their job, when they speak to their non-Muslim friends, family, colleagues, etc., is to compassionately and intelligently try to help uncloud that person's fitrah. And if that Muslim is intellectually and spiritually mature, they would realize sometimes they don't have to answer the questions, and that all they do is they plant seeds in people's hearts and minds, and hopefully will grow into the fruits of faith, the fruits of iman. And sometimes, from your experiences, it may mean that you need to deal with an intellectual argument. Of course, it has its arena, absolutely. But many cases, and I would even say maybe 80% of the cases, is that these people, they just want to know, how do I connect? They want to know how can I feel good about religion? How can I feel good about Islam? How can I feel good about the concept of God? How can I feel, how can I see something positive in this way of life that seemingly gives you certainty, spiritual, intellectual certainty? How do I, engage with that? And sometimes it could be your behavior. Honestly, it could be.
Yeah.
It could just be, I know this sounds like, cliche. It's the uncle's cliche in the masjid, right? Just be, right? And it's true. It can become a cliche. But generally speaking, if we use the tools that we have at our disposal, and we understand the human being as the human being with this fitrah, then we may have to combine a little bit of reason, a little bit of connection, a little bit of getting people to think. Sometimes just saying, I don't know. Why? It would be so powerful to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you say, I don't know, that could be a means for someone's guidance, honestly. And you know what? And when we look at the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, we saw so many people, become Muslim, not because of what you would call deductive arguments, but a lot of them were existential arguments. They were spiritual, Some just wanted to see the character of the Prophet ﷺ. The famous hadith where the Jewish man pulled the Prophet ﷺ by the neck because he owed him some money. And the Prophet's reaction was a reaction of hilm. Allah is al-Halim, and we must have a sense of forbearance. He's the forbearing, and we must be forbearing from a human-centric point of view. And the Prophet ﷺ was the most forbearing. He would respond to anything by that which is better. As Allah says in the Quran, repel by that which is better. Now what's interesting, the Arabic word repel is not followed by a direct object. So it's not saying repelling evil, it says repel by that which is better. The ulama say repel anything by that which is more virtuous and that which is more beautiful. And that was the character of the Prophet ﷺ. And this Jewish man, he was waiting for the final sign. He had one more sign that he was looking for, which was a sign of prophethood. And one of them, and the final one that he was looking for was the fact that the Prophet ﷺ would be forbearing. He would respond to evil, respond to anything by that which is virtuous and that which is more beautiful. Sometimes if we internalize, right, that character, we become, our state of being is that, then I'm telling you, it can change so many people's lives. And it could awaken the truth within. Because look, at the end of the day, Allah guides. Right? It's not your rational algorithm. You could prove anything. You could come up with a deductive argument that necessarily proves everything, right? Everything that you want it to. God's existence, here you go. Here's a deductive argument. The truth of the Prophet ﷺ, here's a deductive argument. All of these things, no problem. But is that going to lead to iman? No. And is that the only way that can lead to iman? Of course not. The very fact that guidance is from Allah alone. The very fact that it's from Allah alone teaches us what? That we need to be humble in the way we think that we're going to convey the call to human beings, right?
Yeah.
Because Allah, by definition, right, he even talks about himself. He is Al-Hakim. He has the totality of wisdom. He is Al-Alim. He has total knowledge, right? So if Allah has the totality of wisdom and knowledge, He has the picture. We just have the pixel. We have a pixelated, if that, we have a pixelated understanding of reality.
Right.
So from that point of view, why do you think this is it? I've got the argument. It's going to really, convince everybody. That's not the case.
It just shows our ignorance as human beings.
Yeah, we're human. So sorry for waffling on this.
No. It's actually really important. I really, it got me thinking when you were talking about like first proofs, and I was thinking about
about that too right now.
Yeah, you know how like human beings, why are we built with a way to with an inclination to tell the truth. We don't want to lie. No one ever teaches that to anyone. It's not something that's conditioned. We have, not just that. And then I was thinking about other things like, why the universe is inclined towards order and rather than chaos. Why isn't that, is that a first proof as well, Brother Hamza? That the universe is inclined towards order rather than chaos?
Is that a first proof? Or, well, if you mean, is that a first principle?
I'm sorry. Yeah, first principle. I misspoke. Sorry.
Well, I would say a first principle is that we have an assumption that we have rational minds and that there's a rational universe. That is very interesting, because if you don't have that assumption, then you can't understand anything.
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that one more time? You said a first principle would be that we have...
So a first principle in this context would be that we have rational minds that can unlock the key to this rational universe.
I see what you're saying. We
didn't have the assumption that we can eventually come to the truth via our reason, and if we didn't have the assumption that we can potentially understand the universe, then nothing would really make sense.
Of course, I see it.
The universe could not be rationalized, then what conclusions could you make? And if our minds could not be rational or could not come to the truth or to a truth via the use of reason, then anything we say would be incoherent. That's the whole point.
That's deep,
and this, for science itself, for philosophy itself, you have to start with that first principle. Although I did a specialist module for my postgrad called The Philosophy of Psychology, and one of the sessions that we're going through was trying to show that human beings are irrational, that there is no rationality. It was more of a kind of, I think, a Darwinian, if I remember clearly, a Darwinian kind of perspective on truth.
I almost see that. I mean, I'm speaking on a very on a simple level, but for a human being to prove that he's irrational is almost like an oxymoron to me, right? Because he by default has this programming to rationalize every time he hears something, and to try to disprove that he's rational is actually like
what they'll have to do is not try to prove that they're irrational, because that would they say there is no truth. I'm like, well, are you sure? Because your statement must be true, right? Because you said there is no truth. Is that statement true? That's the case, then your statement's not true, right? It's like it's self-defeating.
It's beautiful, it's interesting.
I know that's a crude takedown of skepticism, but I think you get the point. So,
of course.
So that person would mainly just have to suggest, not prove anything. They'd be like, you know what, I really fundamentally at the end don't really believe that we are rational anyway. And then they could just live their lives in an emotional or existential way, if that makes sense. But anyway, the point here is, and that's why, look, why is it, and we need to be very clear about this, brothers and Sheikh, why is it that the majority of the Quran doesn't really focus on these proofs in that way? Although, I tried to make the book, I think 50% of my book has a Quran, hadith, or statement of a scholar. So I made sure that everything was grounded in our tradition as best as possible, even if it's a statement of a scholar or comes from a verse. Because I think it's very important for the things that we, the arguments we adopt have to be grounded in our tradition.
Right.
Okay? So anyway, the point here is, why is it that the Quran focuses on worship? Let's be honest. Every time Allah talks about His creative power, go to any chapter. Allah gives us almost, if you think about these premises, have you not seen this? Have you not seen that? And then you see a conclusion somewhere. Therefore, He is one. Therefore, He deserves worship. Therefore,
of course,
Allah is the one that deserves our, our love, obedience. And He deserves the fact that we should get to know Him, and the fact that all praise should be and gratitude belongs to Him alone. These are the fundamental. This is the fundamental spiritual existential logic in the Book of Allah. It moves from you using your senses to understand the outside world and the inner world, your world, and if you have a sound heart and a sound mind and you're sincere, that would inevitably lead to the conclusion that Allah deserves worship, which means to know Allah, to love Allah, to obey Allah, and to direct all internal and external acts of worship to Allah alone. Why does the Quran just focus on the concept of worship? Because Allah says, if you ask the Arabs, who created the heavens and the earth, they will say it's Allah, right? Mm-hmm. So they had that first principle there already about creation, right? From the point of view that, who's the creator, who's the Rabb from that point of view. But the main problem was, how do we show that Allah deserves worship? And for me, I think it's very important for us to stop being on the intellectual back foot. So what? Let people give you 1,000 contentions against this, that, and the other. Big deal. Change the narrative. Have a very positive, articulation of Islam. Say, look, Islam is very simple. Islam says every human being worships. Many of them have misdirected worship. We're just merely showing you who deserves worship. Because if you think about it, at any point in someone's life, whether they're an atheist, whether they're Muslim, whether they're Christian, whether they're a skeptic, whoever they are, at any point in someone's life, they're always ultimately wanting to know something the most. At any point in someone's life, they're always ultimately loving something the most. At any point in someone's life, at some point, they're always obeying or referring to something the most. And at any point in life, they're always being grateful to something the most from an ultimate point of view. So, if you ask anyone a question, right? If I ask you, Mr. John Doe or Joe Blogs, whatever the case may be, what is the thing that you are trying to know the most at this present time? They will give me an answer. Well, if it's nothing, I say, what about last week? What about last month? They'll give me an answer. And if I say to them, what is the thing that you're loving the most, ultimately? They'll give me an answer. If I say to them, what's the thing that you're obeying or you're referring to the most? They'll give me an answer. If I ask them, ultimately, what do you refer to the most? What do you obey the most? And if I ask them, what are you ultimately grateful to the most? They'll give me an answer. Now, that answer is their object of worship. So everybody's worshipping. By default, our job is merely to intelligently and compassionately show people that Allah deserves our worship. And that's the point.
Beautiful.
And yet we don't do that. And this is based on the Quran. Allah says in chapter 39, verse 29, and I'm paraphrasing, consider the situation of two people. One man is a slave to many masters and they're all quarreling. Another man is a slave to one master. Whose condition's best? Whose condition's best? That's the point. And if you think about it, if you don't worship Allah, you're worshipping something else. It reminds me of the poetry of Iqbal, and I mentioned this in the book. When he says, this one prostration that you find so difficult frees you from 1,000 prostrations. Because if you're not worshipping Allah, you're worshipping. Yeah. Take nationalism, for example, right? Or even other ideologies, right? Other isms and schisms. You'll have people who, they're so nationalistic. That's all they want to know about their country and their state and their history and their genetic pool. You get these right-wing. Well, I'm not saying everyone right-wing is bad. I'm not saying that. I don't want to otherize. Just for ease of language, the extreme right-wing, right? The extreme right-wing nationalists, they're like, it's all about state and country. And, I just want to know everything about my forefathers, right? So they want to know the nation the most. Then they love the nation the most. The proof is they would die for the flag, right? You touch the flag, you abuse the flag, you say anything bad about my country and my nation and my people, then it's game over. It's all out war. I'm going to annihilate you. I know this is very crude, but I think you're getting the point, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the next point is they obey and they refer. So the people that represent their nation state, they see them almost as godly. They can't be wrong, right? If he says fake news, then it's fake news, right? That kind of, right? So they refer and obey their leaders who represent their movement or their attitudes to life or their attitudes to the state. The next point is they show gratitude, ultimate gratitude. They believe that all praise and thanks belongs to the mother nation, the state. I'll be nothing without my state, without my genetic pool, without my forefathers, without this, that, and the other. That's their object of worship. And unfortunately, some Muslims fall for that object of worship all the time. And that is a big problem in our community as well. You had people, colonialists, who basically raped and pillaged lands, and then they decided to draw lines on a map. And sometimes they weren't even creative. They drew a straight line. Yeah, look at Africa. Look at Egypt. These are straight lines, man.
Straight lines, yeah.
We define ourselves by those lines.
Exactly.
I mean, come on, man. If that is not stupidity, then I don't know what stupidity is. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't you think that I'm just like gunning down communities. No, I'm British. I love to be British, right? Because I think there is a sense of a collective feel of what it means to be British, generally speaking. You're brought up in an education system. There are some sports that you're more, affiliated towards. There are some characteristics that you might have, I'll call it a tinge of your character. You could tell that this guy is from Britain. Like when I used to go to America, when I used to make my jokes, like I know this guy's British because he's got British jokes,
right?
British humor, yeah. Or even our sense of appreciating the other. It's a very a British thing, generally speaking. So this sense of gentleman manners is still very British and stuff like that. So don't get me wrong, it's important to have respect and a kind of affiliation and love for the people that you live with directly, right? From that point of view. But to be nationalistic, that's a different issue. That's like ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was as an example. Yeah. So people take nationalism, and that could be the object of worship, unfortunately. Because if that's the thing that they want to know the most ultimately, and they love the most ultimately, and they obey the most ultimately, and they direct all acts of worship, which in this case, gratitude towards the most ultimately, then that's their object of worship.
And
so
I think if you understand that people, how they worship, they're actually worshiping something that teaches you the how to be like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How so? Is he understood the reason why he had so much mercy, even with his enemies, is that he saw them worshiping something, and he knew that they had that tendency. It just had to be directed. He knew that everyone was a potential, right? And he saw everybody worshiping. He just knew he had to try his best to direct that worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So even with that, just that understanding that people are always worshiping something regardless, that gives you a different type of hope and a type of mercy towards people, that you can direct their inclinations to the ultimate worship. And,
of course.
And there's something beautiful that you mentioned about, just belonging to a nation. That's something very, very natural. Us as human beings, we're social beings, and we have to have certain things around us that pacify us and that quench our thirst just to be a human being. Yes. And amongst that is belonging. When you belong somewhere, people, and the reason why I'm bringing this back up is people blur the lines. They think that, hey, I'm proud to be British, I'm proud to be this. They think you're being nationalistic, which you're not.
Of course not.
Right?
Yeah.
You're actually exercising your humanness of having to belong somewhere. But where it becomes a problem is that you believe that your blood is valuable in somebody else's because of a geographic location. That's where it becomes problematic, right?
Yeah.
Based on certain principles.
And a lot of Muslims need to grow up, frankly. I mean, the minute you say, I love my country, they're like, oh my God, kufr, shirk, nationalism. They just throw all the terms at you. Like, come on, man.
All at once?
The Sahaba had tribal affiliations. I mean, if you study the lives of the Sahaba, like if you were to even be bothered to move away from your nasheed artists and your, so-called favorite speakers on YouTube, which even includes me. I think we have a very crazy celebrity culture at the moment, if you were even bothered to, insert yourself into our tradition and immerse yourself in our tradition, you see that, the Sahaba were human.
Yeah.
They were, and they had tribal affiliations, but it just wasn't to the level of what you call asabiyya or nationalism, right? And Islam was always the kind of the ethical worldview and the metaphysical and moral and spiritual worldview. So that was the case. So you're right. Look, and this links to the fact that if you understand the fitrah properly, then you see every human being as aslan, foundationally good.
Yes.
That's very powerful.
Yep.
Because this is a metaphysic now. It changes the way you see reality, because metaphysics is first principles, really. It's the lenses you put on your eyes in order to see and understand the world. and how to understand the world and how to understand all these connections. So if you have this fitrah, then you see every human being as a potential Muslim, and you see every human being as foundationally good.
Yeah.
And that is very, very powerful. And it would help you not to otherize, because I think some Muslims have gone way too far in their kind of love and hate for the sake of Allah. I think they've blurred the boundaries. They don't have boundaries, or they've basically become ideologically pathological. Yeah. And it's a hardness of the heart.
Yeah.
Because, Allah says in the Quran, we have to be very nuanced with our tradition. Allah says in the Quran, Surah Al-Imran, verse 113, people are not the same. If you go to the Mufassirin and you see the discussion on this ayah, Allah is talking about there are people outside of the Islamic tradition, outside of being Muslim, that are upright and just. This really teaches us something. It teaches us that, yes, we do have categories of, you have the munafiqeen, you have the kuffar, you have the Muslims. We have these categories for sure. But Allah is teaching us not to otherize. Because otherization is not merely categorizing people. Otherization is saying that there is a category of people, and every single one of those people, or those persons in that group, is evil, or they have a negative, evil thing about them, right? That is not the Islamic tradition, because Allah is telling us people are not the same. So you have a general categorizations in the Quran. Allah is specifying, however, people are not the same. And we see this in the interaction of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When you have the Jewish boy who was on his sickbed, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asking him to, affirm the reality that there is no deity worthy of worship but the deity, but Allah. Right, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his final messenger. The Jewish boy looked to his son, looked to his father, and his father said, "Listen to Abu Qasim." He referred to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by his kunya, like his nickname, if you like. Now, if you understand the Arab culture of that time, to do that, you must have a friendly connection with somebody.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now, the Prophet who some of his Sahaba were very rich, but he would basically get a loan from a Jewish person. What does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, analyze from a psychological point of view. Like, if I want to get a loan from someone, I'm not going to ask someone that I hate, right? I'm not going to ask someone that I think is scum. I'm not going to ask someone that I don't trust, especially when you understand that, every loan is like a form of sadaqah, yeah? I will ask someone who, he's my boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point I'm trying to say is we need to see things from a human, not even from a human point of view. We need to see things from a God-centric point of view. What does Allah want us to do in this situation?
And even,
we rarely ask that
yeah,
question.
go ahead, sorry. No, even based on that, I mean, it may be seeming like I'm switching gears, but it's kind of related to this. I believe one of the best ways to teach, if not the best way to teach, is you may have, as anybody, we may have learned certain things along our lives, right? But when we revisit, or when we have to teach it to somebody, we wish, or we start teaching, I should say, in a manner that we wish that we were taught in a certain way, right? And that may have sounded a little confusing. I apologize. Let me rephrase that. One of the best and heartfelt ways to teach, I feel, is that you teach people from your experiences of what you wish that someone had told you. And now you've learned it, right? Let's say somebody's 40 years old and they are teaching people that are anywhere between 15 to 25 years old. And a majority of their teaching takes place based on what they wish that someone had taught them. Right? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, just like a parent would to
exactly.
Like when my daughters, as they're growing older, I try to tell them like, hey, these are like the pitfalls that I experienced,
exactly.
and I want you to
and
avoid
that's a
them.
mix of reasoning and emotion combined, right? That's a mix of emotion and reason combined. And that's exactly how I feel your book is kind of like, it's very casual, yet very academic at the same time, right? It's very casual, kind of explaining what you went through, but at the same time, when you read between the lines, just as soon as I open up in just the first few pages that I was reading, it's as if that, you're teaching someone on a very personal level. It's very difficult to do that with a book, right? And,
yes.
And that's why I love this book,
I mean, not perfect. I'm going through a revised edition at the moment before I do the second edition.
Mashallah.
Because you time, and I've seen so many typos. I'm like, oh my god, yeah. But when I found out Harry Potter had 100 typos, I was so happy.
No, the style is awesome, man, and it's very human.
Look,
it's very human.
Well, we're human beings, you know,
Yeah.
and
Well, I think a lot of the discourse that academics try to transmit to lay people gets lost. So
it's very hard because
yeah.
It was one brother once said to me, "This book is not as high academic as it should be." I was like, "Well, it's not an academic book. It's not meant for example, PhD students. It was aimed at people at late high school to maybe finishing a master's, a postgrad. It was for those people who are more likely to get doubts and concerns about their tradition."
But I would even disagree with him on that. I would say the vernacular and the language is probably not at that level, but the concepts are all very, very advanced and very simple at the same time.
I wanted to basically write a book where I could sit with anyone and argue the concept, the basic concepts.
Exactly.
I could argue till the cows come home on the concepts because I wanted to be happy with what I wrote. But also, you know, and I even said I can't write everything. There are so many things that you could talk about. Like even in the argument from consciousness, there are things about the phenomenal concept strategy and Brian Law's approach and what his answer would be to certain contentions. And these things you can't even find online. It's very because when I did the philosophy of the mind for my postgrad, and I did it for my dissertation as well, it gets so deep. I said, you know, we could talk about those things, but it's irrelevant. And those are kind of things that you don't need.
Yeah.
And that was my point. You know, if someone, you know, doesn't know how to address Brian Law's phenomenal concept strategy to basically undermine non-physicalist accounts of consciousness, then really does that put a hole in your faith? I don't think so. It probably puts a hole in your understanding of the English language, yeah, or philosophy. Sure. So, you know, and we need to just basically, you know what, we have to go back to basics, really. You know, I had someone who sent me an email many years ago, and he said, you know, my faith is on the floor because they discovered the Higgs Boson. And I'm like, what?
What's the Higgs Boson? I don't even know what that is.
The Higgs Boson was basically
the
particle that they found. They empirically found the particle that made up the Higgs field.
Oh,
what was
okay.
field? Yeah, the Higgs field was
okay.
Yeah, Higgs field that was something that was turned on in the early universe, and that it gave particles mass apart from the photon, and they found it. And you have all these popular articles and magazines saying they found the God particle. I'm like, okay, well, if you understand why they said that, it had nothing to do with God. In the beginning, it was called the goddamn particle because it was so hard to find, but they removed the damn.
Oh,
just
wow.
weakness. And that's the problem. We see things on popular magazines, and that's why for me it goes to show that we don't really have an intellectual problem. Wallahi, I don't think we have an intellectual problem, generally speaking, amongst the lay masses or even amongst students. We have a psychological problem, and that is we look externally, right, for verification a lot.
For affirmation.
Yeah, we're going through post-colonial trauma, I'm telling you.
Exactly. You stole the words out of my mouth, yeah.
Post-colonial trauma. And I'm not saying, look at me, I'm the Western Greek guy coming from a very sound family, coming into the Muslim community, analyzing the Muslims, and I'm carrying my own revert baggage.
And privilege.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
That's a favorite word or term around here in the U.S. Yeah, everyone that is not, everyone that's basically white is coming from privilege.
I think that's wrong. I think that's racist, frankly.
Exactly. That's what we've been trying to dig into these concepts that have been kind of flourishing in Muslim communities now.
Like some people think I'm white and privileged. I'm like, firstly, have you seen my skin tone?
You look Pakistani, man.
and coming privilege, really? I was brought up in Hackney in the 1980s, and you know my family had no food. We had to collect copper coins. And I had to go to the pharmacy and to collect all these coins just to get my mum's sanitary towels. And we had to live for potatoes on weeks. I'm not saying this to make people feel sorry for me. Alhamdulillah, we're fine now. But we went through a very dark period. My mum was almost killed, right? And mugged, and she was like strangled. We had my dad would work maybe 4 days in a row.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, these are the ideas that are coming from the left, though.
Yeah.
Just to create a boogeyman, or I think in the UK they say bogeyman, right? So they want people to blame, and you're not they want to take accountability away from you and blame it on.
I went to Canada, and the massive kind of Professor Peterson movement, Jordan Peterson.
Right.
I actually like quite a lot what he says, right?
Yeah, he's a cool dude.
Not everything, but yeah.
And I think he's on his journey, and I have emailed him. I want to have dinner with him, but he was busy when I was in Toronto. But he said he'll catch up with me later this year.
That's good. I've been hoping that you talk to him, because he seems like somebody that you could have a good conversation with.
Oh, yeah.
So many people judge people on their YouTube clips and on their journey, and they're not even bothered to pick up the phone or the email saying, "How you doing? Let's chat." You see this with Muslims a lot.
Right.
That Muslims must be like that. Really? I mean, are you the same person you were 2 years ago? If you are, then you're a zombie. You got problems. Yeah. If you're a being, then I follow the kind of Bruce Lee model for the human being. Yeah? Be like a river. Yeah. You don't stand in the same river twice, because keep on flowing. And if you don't flow anymore, you stagnate and you become smelly. Keep on flowing and you're fresh and you give other things life. That's what
beautiful.
Imam Shafi said about river, which is quite interesting. I think there's a correlation between Bruce Lee and Imam Shafi.
Yes,
That's
my man.
But the point I'm trying to say here is people change and they evolve. And that's why it's very important to speak to people, directly. How you doing? What's your views? What's going on? Speak to me. Let's connect, And it's very important in the social media age to have that adab. That's proper adab, yeah? Bypass this kind of rubbish and sound bites, and just to really connect with human beings and say, let's talk. Let's connect with one another. It's very powerful. But yeah, so Professor Jordan Peterson, he's going against the kind of like postmodern Marxist narrative, which is very interesting. And I actually agree with him. Like, I was in Canada, and, some, social justice warrior, she was like, "Oh, I believe it to be true because I choose to believe." And so that's very interesting. So you're saying the premise of your truth is your mere choice of believing. And that's your metaphysics of truth. That's your first principle. Because your mere choosing to believe makes it true. So, okay, let me give you a thought experiment. I did this in front of the whole class. I said, I believe that I am the king of the world, and anything I do is moral regardless of what I do. So I decide to kill you. Is it moral? And is my belief that me killing you, is that morally true? Is that a true belief? Do you know what she said? She said yes.
Wow.
And everyone laughing. I said, I tell you why you've hesitated. You could tell she was in a state, an emotional state. You've hesitated because you've realized how ridiculous your first principles are in understanding truth. Because truth is not your mere choice. It's true because I believe it, because I choose to believe it. I'm sorry, you just, that just can't be the case. And a lot of I noticed a little bit of that in Canada, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what is your approach with your kids now? That I think a lot of our listeners would be curious to know. Like, hey, I'm sure like Hamza Tzortzis' kids are, they're just as good as him, or they could.
The assumption that you should
yeah, they can. Yeah. Has he transmitted all his knowledge to his kids? And what would you recommend other parents in terms of what kind of education they should provide to their kids in handling a lot of the discourse that's taking place in academia?
Can I answer that for you before you answer, sir?
First, read the Divine Reality.
No,
right?
I swear to God, I was going to say that. No, I'll tell you why I was going to say that. And Hamza didn't ask me to say this. Is because it starts off very, very simple on a very human level. And I personally, I'm gonna introduce this book, to as many people as I know. But it goes through a step-by-step progression, and any other things that you want to add on to that, you can. It's good to have a good foundation. And after you have a foundation, you could add whatever. I think this is a very, very good foundation.
Yeah.
Because parents are going to learn the process of teaching their kids now. I'm going to learn the process of teaching my kids now. Right?
Well,
and that's the best way to learn.
I got an email from a parent, which, it just makes me cry. And he said, if I remember correctly, he said, now I have a book that I could give to my kids before they go to university because he was so worried.
It's all right, brother. Take your time, man. No rush.
And the reason I'm choking up, because there were far better people than me. But we live in a world where, it's so frustrating. People just didn't conjure up the strength to do stuff. And then, people think, Hamza is a da'i and stuff. But, deep down, I always think that, Allah says that sometimes He'll promote the religion through the fasiqun, those who sin. I don't see myself as anything. This is an honor. This is not privilege. If you think Allah needs you, then you're already destroyed. This is.
I can relate to you so much, Hamza, with what you're saying, because I think about like this podcast that we started, and I'm like, and all the headaches it brings, and all the different responsibilities it brings, and I look at my own faults and all my own weaknesses. I mean, Shaykh Amir knows me like a brother. He knows all my faults and weaknesses, and he knows like at times I feel like, man, I'm a hypocrite for even doing this, because I'm involved in dawah. I'm involved in spreading Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's word, and such a huge weight. And at many times I wanted to just say, you know what, let's just call it quits. Quit while we're ahead before, before I continue on this hypocrisy or something, and you just can't. It's because I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just kind of puts the spark in you, and he says like
he uses you.
Yeah, and there's no way like you can stop. It's because you've kind of been given a responsibility and this purpose, and it's just your job to carry out that mission, and all these doubts and all these other things that you find in yourself, and all these flaws that we find in ourselves, they're only there to, I mean, it kind of sounds silly, but you come to the realization that they're from shaitan, and that they're there to inhibit your progress.
I mean, yeah, my frustration was that, not enough was being done. But you know what? Allah chooses who He chooses, and, alhamdulillah, there's so many bright minds now. So many people are coming up in the social media sphere, and they're writing books. I have a lot of love for Dr. Muhammad Ghilan, for example.
Yeah, good friend of ours.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's top guy. Yeah. Allah bless him and preserve him. You have, for example, the Yaqeen Institute. They're writing some interesting stuff as well.
Yeah.
You have Ustad Daniel. You have so many people who are doing their own thing in their own way. That's very powerful, and I'm really happy with that. Wallahi, I'm really happy with that. And we should support everybody that's doing good work. Look, so
is that the main reason why you wrote the book? Because a father was concerned about his children that were going to
emailed me after reading the book, saying now he has something to give to his students. He's confident to send them to university.
Allahu Akbar.
And so one of the reasons I wrote the book is, it was just like a need. It was like a burning need. Look, there's multiple motivations. You can't single out one motivation. One motivation was, I've done a hell of a lot of mistakes, man. I didn't have guidance around me. There was not this like kind of social media movement with shuyukh and different institutes, and I wasn't connected to ulama. I came from, very kind of interesting, I was like the test case for social media, I think. Just dawah. And, I've done a lot of mistakes. And as I've grown, I'm thinking, oh, God, I don't recognize me 3 years ago. I don't like me 3 years ago.
Right?
I don't like you 5 years ago. I'm like, oh my days. And now every time I give a talk, it may sound really silly, but I always mention it. I'm like, I'm on a journey. I've been on a journey, because one thing for me, I think one of my weaknesses is not being understood. And if people want to understand me, how I was 4 years ago, that for me, it's terrifying. I really want people, people deserve to be understood. And that's why, one of the reasons was I wanted to be understood. I've changed, I'm trying to make a robust book. I mean, I went through all the references myself. I even referenced YouTube clips I took an idea from. That's how careful I was.
SubhanAllah.
I'm not joking. You know, and let me just be very honest. There were some original references, historical references that I took from a historian, a brother who's an academic. I didn't trust. Well, I did trust him, but I said, you know what? Let me be sure. I got the books myself, and I knew it. There were some page numbers wrong. Instead, it was 131. It was supposed to be 113. So before I did anything, I spent weeks. Before I published it, I spent weeks going through all the references as best as possible, even where I've taken an idea from. I even spoke to PhD students and academics on, what's the best ethical thing to do. They're like, you don't have to do what you're doing. I said, no, I want to tell them, even if I heard a YouTube clip, even if it's not an academic one, but if I took the idea from them, I'm going to let them know. Yeah. And I've done that.
Yeah.
If you go through the references, you see, this argument has been derived and taken from, for example, Shaykh Hamza Yusuf lecture on, why God deserves praise, for example. And that's it. I took the structure of his argument from there.
And that mode, it keeps you humble as well. Like, these aren't your ideas. These aren't like we all, the saying goes that we all stand on the shoulders of our scholars and previous teachers, and I think, well, when people say, "Oh, Sim, what you said on the podcast was amazing," and things like that, and I'm like, sometimes you feel like your ego kind of inflating for a second, and then you're like quickly explain to them, like, "No, this is who I got it from. This is who taught it to me," and they're like usually befuddled, like, "Wait, what's wrong with this guy? Like, why is he like going out of his way to explain?" They're kind of surprised,
Yeah, there's some references where I say I like to thank Abu Huraira for actually giving me some of these arguments. It was to do with God of the Gaps and stuff like that. That's not his real name. He didn't want his real name to be there because he's very, very humble. But he likes cats, so he said, "Call me Abu Huraira." Right? Call me the father of cats.
I actually know a British brother by the name of Abu Huraira too.
But this brother wasn't British, by the way. He's
okay.
So, anyways, basically, the reason I'm mentioning that is to show that I wanted to be careful and learn from my previous mistakes, and one of the main motivations of the book is to actually show that there's a progress going on, and if people look up to me for some reason, that they should look up to the fact that I have acknowledged many mistakes, and that we need to all move forward in a positive way, right? That's the first thing. And also for the robustness of the arguments, like some of the arguments needed refining previously, and I was going for a try and error period, and I wanted them to basically have something that was solid, as solid as possible. The other thing was, there was a burning need to have a book, an Islamic version of, a modern version of, because I've been traveling up and down the world, around the world and up and down the country, the UK, at universities, and people having the same questions and the same doubts and the same issues. And I'm like, even if I trained 100 people to be like me or to be even better than me, right? And we have many brothers who are training now that are much better than me, mashallah, like Saburo, Ahmed, for example, and others. We can't speak to everyone in the world. And a book usually goes to people further than it goes than talks to. Like, you may have, 10,000 hits in a video, right? But that's a 1 hour lecture, and majority of them would only have listened to the first 10 minutes. But if someone reads a book, they're already connected and they're ready to go through that book. And if you could, get 10,000 people to read a book, it's going to be much greater impact than 10,000 people watching video.
Yeah.
So in the long term, if we're very sincere concerning the dawah, concerning articulating Islam and conveying the call, we need to write more. And there's a lack of good Muslim books out there. And that's why I'm writing another book now called The Failed Hypothesis with Brother Saburo Ahmed. It's a collection of essays.
Saburo Ahmed, that name sounds familiar. Who is that?
Saburo Ahmed?
Yes.
Check him out, man. He's the guy who deals with evolution.
Okay, yeah, that's okay.
One of our boys, man.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant brother, man.
If he's your boy, he's our boy, inshallah.
He's all our boys. Yeah, we're all the brothers.
So we have like 15, 20 minutes left on the podcast. Can you answer some of these questions I was telling you about before we wrap up? That some of our fans and listeners sent us. Did any specific questions stand out to you that you wanted to address, or should I just pick it out of a hat?
Well, before I do that, apologies for being a incoherent emotional wreck in this podcast.
Not at all, man. Not at all.
No, man. You're speaking your mind, man.
And then this is something that we have in our academia that the other ideologies and beliefs don't have, that personal connection that allows even our academics to relate to listeners and things that everyone's experiencing.
It runs deep, man. That's what it is.
So I thank you.
Hey,
thank
pick
you
them
so
out.
much. Jazakallah khair.
Just pick them out.
Okay, pick them out. Okay, so one of the brothers, I think, is Shaykh Amir's good friend, so I have to make sure we can't skip him. He is saying, my 7-year-old asked how God was created, and I didn't have a good answer.
Okay, good. So, there's a few ways to answer this question. Okay, the first way is when you say, ask how did something get created, the assumption in that question is that that thing itself was actually created, meaning it had a beginning. Now, if that thing had no beginning, you can't answer that question. The question doesn't apply. So you can't say, how was the thing that never began? How did the thing that never began begin? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So the easiest way to do it is, well, Allah didn't have a beginning, right? Allah is eternal. He doesn't have a beginning and he will never have an end. And that's why it doesn't make sense to say who created Allah, because he was always there. No one created Allah. He is uncreated. That's the first simple way of doing it. The second way of doing it is basically just referring to the fact that, well, okay, say for instance, we know that Allah created the whole universe, right? Allah created the whole universe. And now you're saying, who created Allah? Okay, well, why don't you raise that question to the creator of Allah then? So if you're saying something created Allah, then what created that thing that created Allah? Then just keep on asking the same question.
Right.
Well, what created that thing that created that thing that created Allah? If that goes on forever, you will never have anything in existence in the first place because of what you call the absurdity of the infinite regress of causes. For example, if this universe was as a result of another universe, and this universe was as a result of another universe, and that goes on forever, we will never have this universe in the first place.
Beautiful.
A nice example is, imagine I have a water pistol with some water. It's a sunny day. We're going to play fight and squirt water on our faces. Before I can squirt water on your face, I have to get the causal power or the permission, right, from someone else in order for me to squirt water in your face. Now, if that person has to do the same thing as well, and that goes on forever, will I ever squirt your face? No.
That's the necessity of one creator.
Yeah, so it basically, as Al-Ghazali said, he basically said, you could say what caused the cause of the universe, but if that goes on forever, then you never have the universe in the first place. Right. So by necessity, you need to, by rational necessity, there is an uncaused cause and uncreated creator from that point of view. Because there's an absurdity of an infinite regress of causes. So that's one way of doing it too. The other way is just tell them to say, I believe in Allah and Allah is uncreated. I know that sounds really weird, but it depends why the questioner asked the question. Because some people ask these questions because of a spiritual issue or an existential issue rather than an intellectual issue. And that's why you have the hadith. You have the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said, just say I believe in Allah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or the other hadith that refers to the fact that this came from the jinns, right? So the question itself. So
Brother Hamza, the Surah Wal Asr, Surah Asr, that's what it really is alluding to. That time is a creation, and that the beginning and end the idea of the beginning and end is a creation that has been put into our mind. That it's not really.
It's what we're bound by.
Yeah, we're bound by.
We're bound by time. Allah's not bound by time.
Sorry, that's another way of looking at it as well. I mean, and if you mean by time, physical time, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's big debates about
what time actually is, and
what time is, and metaphysical time, etc. That's
right.
That's one quick way of doing it. Like for example, if you do it with your children, for example, say just have a sweet, right? And say, son, daughter, I want to give you the sweet, right? But before I give you the sweet, I have to ask mommy if I can give you the sweet. Shall I do that? Okay. Yeah. Mommy, darling, can I give the sweet to the kids? She was like, I don't know. I think we have to ask grandma. right? And then you go ask grandma. And then grandma says, you know what? I think I have to ask my grandma or whatever, right? Just say to the kids, now, if that goes on forever, are you ever going to get this sweet? Well, of course not. Well, exactly. So,
That's a great example, dude.
If something created the creator and that goes on forever, would you ever have the creation in the first place? No. So just, just be creative,
Great exercise.
Another question, why is there no trace of monotheistic religions in certain parts of the world? How is that compatible with the universality of the prophetic guidance claimed by the Quran? So the questioner is asking, why isn't there evidence of other civilizations throughout time that called for monotheism? And how is it so? Because I think he's saying that how is there not guidance for remote parts of Africa? And then
look, I don't know history, right? I'm not going to claim to know basis of this question or anthropology, whatever the case may be. Yeah? But let's just analyze the question, philosophically. Okay, say you're right. Say there's areas in the world, civilizations that never call to monotheism. How does that now follow Islam and monotheism is not true? It doesn't. There is no link between that conclusion, right, and the conclusion that monotheism is not true, because there are explanations within our tradition that can explain such phenomena. Namely, these people, they had a clouded fitrah, right? They didn't express the fact that that the divine deserves worship. They could have been the people of people who didn't receive any messengers, right? So there's so many things that you could actually explain away. It's not an evidence. And not only that, I'll go to the premise of the question as well, which is that you think all the historical evidence that we have is actually conclusive. By the very nature, this type of historical evidence is not conclusive. Maybe those civilizations did have a messenger that was calling to the truth, but, the documentation or the inscriptions or whatever the case may be, were removed because they killed him, and we know many of the prophets were killed, right?
Of course.
And we know there were tens of thousands of prophets throughout time, and throughout because we know the story of Mirage and how the prophet prayed at Masjid al-Aqsa with tens of thousands of prophets.
But the point here is sometimes it's better for people to understand their own question because they don't. And this is very powerful. If you get anything from this podcast from a philosophical point of view, is to understand of questioning the question, not to be like, to try and win an argument, but to get people to think sincerely so it could awaken the truth within.
Yeah, what does your question actually mean? Yeah.
Yeah, so one person asked me once, well, God didn't give me, what do you call it, permission, or what's the other better way of, a lot of social media justice warriors use this term. He didn't give me, I forgot the word, man. Permission to give me life, or for me to come on earth, for me to be tested for what, for me to be tested in this way. What's that word you use?
Yeah, I'm thinking as well.
Oh man, yeah, I now have to find that word. We're gonna spend another hour on this podcast just finding the word. Anyway, so the point is consent. That's it.
Oh, consent.
Yeah. So Allah didn't give me consent in order for me to come on earth to be tested with this trial, or to be tested in this way, in order to see if I'm going to go paradise or hell, right? Now, some people are just trying to answer the question. I'm like, well, why should you answer the question? Because the minute you try to answer that question, you're adopting a different metaphysic. At the end of the day, they're assuming that they own themselves. They don't. You, Jack, Allah owns you. He's not morally obliged to ask you consent for anything.
Right.
When I get some Play-Doh or some clay and I make a little sculpture, for example, and say, for example, I don't like the sculptor's nose now, I want to change his nose. Do I now ask the thing that I've made, hey, can I change your nose?
Right.
No, I've made the thing.
You can smash it if you want.
Or the author in a book and the characters that were created in that book. Like those characters didn't ask permission.
But this is very important because some Muslims sometimes have these questions like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
I mean, you need back to basics, the fundamental, and this is linking to Allah's rububiyyah, a foundational aspect of his oneness and tawheed, which is the fact that he's the sole maintainer, sustainer, owner, master, loving nurturer of everything that exists, which includes you. So, when you do this, it's very powerful because now you've opened a new area of knowledge for that person. by explaining why the assumption of their question was wrong. And now you're explaining aspects of who Allah is and aspects of His oneness and worship. Do you see the point?
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to be very careful that you don't have to answer the questions. So take this historical one, for example. Well, fine. It doesn't undermine monotheism, right? Maybe the messengers were there and then they were killed and there's no trace of them. And there you go. Move on. It's actually not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, right?
Right.
And it gets you to understand the presuppositions behind the question, which is the supposition that this historical knowledge is factual in an absolute way, and that we have all historical knowledge, and that there's no other possibility of other historical explanation to explain why there wasn't an appearance of a call to monotheism in this particular area. Of course, there are many explanations that you can come up with. So it doesn't undermine Islam in any shape or form. And I think it's always very powerful to get people to think anyway, rather than just give them an answer.
There's another interesting question, one of the brothers sent on the page. How do we combat the idea that there's a large, I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, how do we combat the idea that there is a significant portion of the scientific community that does not believe in God? For example, like Neil deGrasse Tyson and others.
Yeah.
And I think, like, for example, I'll let you answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, look, we have to be, careful here. Science does not lead to atheism. Even atheist scientists and philosophers of science agree with this. It's an academic consensus that science does not lead to atheism. Okay? So therefore, people's atheism or scientists' atheism is not as a result of scientific evidence. It's because they have a philosophical position.
Yeah.
Or they philosophize the scientific evidence in a particular way. But it's not the evidence itself, or it's not the theory itself, or it's not the confirmation itself, or it's not the science itself that has led directly to their atheism, generally speaking. Yeah? And, a study was done that a lot of scientists' atheism is because of their background, and they didn't have a connection with religion, or they didn't say it was, it wasn't valid for them in their life. It wasn't needed, or whatever the case may be. So, there is no link between science and atheism in any shape or form. I actually posted a lecture on my YouTube page, Hamza Andreas Tzortzis, on does science lead to atheism? Has science killed religion? And I go through, the 4 false assumptions that I write in the book on, when people say science leads to atheism, there are 4 false assumptions. And I break down those 4 false assumptions. But it's not an academic exercise, really, because academics don't really agree with the notion that science leads to atheism, even though they're atheists themselves. And I could summarize by just quoting Hugh Goach. He wrote the book Scientific Method in Brief, published by Cambridge. He's a scientist and a philosopher of science as well. And he said, to claim that science leads to atheism is to get high marks for enthusiasm and low marks for logic. Right? And that's the case. So the explanation is, well, it's got nothing to do with their science. And if you make the assertion that science leads to atheism, then you're adopting 4 false assumptions.
Go ahead. Yeah. I'm sorry.
One of the false assumptions is that science is the only way to render the truth about the world and reality. The other false assumption is that just because science works, it's true. The third false assumption is that science leads to certainty. And the final assumption is that they have a misunderstanding of philosophical naturalism and methodological naturalism. Now, we don't have time to go through all of this.
Yeah.
I suggest go on to the lecture or read the book, read the chapter in the book.
Read the book. And I just want to add on to that. There's this false notion among a lot of Muslims and people of faith, actually, that there's a wide, that the scientific community is full of atheists, and that's completely far from the truth. I think a lot of the people like Neil deGrasse Tyson get platforms on liberal media, and they're able to talk about their atheistic beliefs on these large platforms, and the equivalent of the religious equivalent of him won't get that platform because
exactly. The vast majority of scientists are religious people, actually, or are believe in God. That's actually, I think, statistically proven.
I'm not sure if there's any studies on that, but it would be interesting if you know if anything like that, Brother Hamza.
Think about the premise of the question as well. Yeah. And I would, so what? If all the scientists in the world didn't believe in God, does that mean you shouldn't believe in God?
Perfect.
I mean,
Perfect. Well said.
Of course.
Just think about it, right?
Of course. But for some people, is that blunder, right? They actually feel like, hey, why is it that all the people who are quote unquote knowledgeable in science, why are they not believing in God? Well, that kind of is that pushing point. What you're saying is absolutely correct. That's like the molecular question that should be asked, right? Who cares if all of the world's scientists combined were on one scale and it's just you that's left? Forget about just a scientist. The whole entire world didn't believe in the creator and you're the only person left out of 7 billion. But for some people, just as an intro to the way they look at this world, they want to look at science and science solves everything, and
I think
they're blundered by the scientific scholarship.
We respect science and we love science, and Muslims have an amazing history of science to the fact where many historians of science actually attribute the kind of modern origins of the scientific method to Muslims, like Ibn al-Haytham, for example. Obviously, there were many who were responsible, but they claim that Ibn al-Haytham, he was, who wrote the book on optics. He was one of the first to formalize the scientific method of experimentation, etc. So we have it as part of our tradition. But look, science is beautiful, but does it change? Absolutely.
It's always changing.
It's always changing.
Is it based on induction? Yes. And if you study induction, you know that you may have a future observation that could be at odds with your previous conclusions. And that's the beauty of science. And if science works, it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. For example, we had the theory of phlogiston in the 1700s. And the theory of phlogiston was that combustible objects would release phlogisticated air. And Dan Rutherford in 1772, he took that theory and he discovered nitrogen. But after they found that phlogiston was false. So what that teaches us is that you could get a scientific truth like nitrogen from a once workable theory that now is false. So what works doesn't mean just because something works, it doesn't mean it's true. Okay, one false assumption, because if someone says, "Oh, science works, therefore it's true," and if science can therefore only deal with things that you can observe and God can't be observed, therefore God is not true. It's fuzzy logic, but that's how they try to understand the world. Another thing is science leads to certainty. It doesn't. Most scientific conclusions essentially are based on induction. You don't have an infinite number of observations. You don't have the total set of observations.
That's
and
true.
The correct understanding and reasoning of those observations, right? You have particulars, you have limited information, and you may have a future observation that contradicts previous conclusions. Even Dawkins, the evangelical Darwinist, for example, right? He said, I think in his book, The Devil's Chaplain, he said that, in, I think it was 10 years or some time, we could have data that could be at odds with our conclusions about Darwinism. Darwinism can completely change based on future data. That's the beauty of science. So science is not certain from that point of view. It's fluid. Yes, some things are well confirmed, but even well confirmed things can, there could be a paradigm shift.
Yes.
So therefore you can't say science leads to certainty because that's a false assumption. And they use that false assumption because they're saying, well, if science leads to certainty and science as a method can only address things that you can observe and God can't be observed, therefore God doesn't exist. Fuzzy logic, but that's why that assumption is there. But it's a false assumption, just mentioned. The other false assumption is that science is the only way to render the truth about the world and reality. Well, that's not true. Science has so many limitations. Limitations concerning morality, concerning, understanding the purpose for things, concerning the person, the first person inner subjective conscious experiences, for instance. Fundamentally, science can't prove necessary mathematical truths or necessary truths like deductive logic.
Or things that are unobservable.
Yes, and you need deduction and logic and mathematics before you even do science. And for science to try and prove it is like arguing in a circle, which is ridiculous. So, and what's very interesting, say in a deductive argument, you have a conclusion that necessarily follows. So take, for example, John is a bachelor. Let's start this way. John is a bachelor. Bachelors are unmarried men. Therefore, John is an unmarried man. Now, that is a deductive argument. The conclusion necessarily follows. It's a valid deductive argument because the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. The premises guarantee the truth of the conclusion. It's also sound because the premises are true. We've got good reasons to believe in them. So a sound deductive argument is that not only is it valid that the conclusion necessarily follows, but the premises have some justification. Okay, so that's a sound deductive argument. Now, why does it necessarily follow? Why does it necessarily follow that John is an unmarried man now? Because we said John is a bachelor. Bachelors are unmarried men. Therefore, John is an unmarried man. Why does it necessarily follow that John is an unmarried man? Now you may argue, it necessarily follows by virtue of its meaning. No, we don't believe it necessarily follows by virtue of its meaning, because you could change the meaning. You may not know the meaning of the words, and you still say it necessarily follows. Why? Because there is a logical relation with the forgot the word to use now. The logical relation with the logical properties in the premises. So the logical properties in the premises are John, bachelor, and man, and unmarried. So these four logical properties, there is a logical relation between them. Science, nothing in the empirical world can prove that logical relation. Zero, nothing, nada, zada, khalas, finished. and I actually did this for my dissertation, right? And if you read the works of Professor Lawrence Bonjour, he actually argues very profoundly for the a priori nature of logical reasoning and necessary logical truths. A priori meaning prior to experience. You need it before you have any experience. So things like mathematics and logic and logical reasoning and deductive arguments, you can't prove them scientifically. So there is something outside of science that is true. So science is not the only way to form conclusions about the world and reality, it's not the only way to understand truth. Another example is testimony. If you study Western epistemology and even Eastern epistemology, you see that testimony now is a fundamental and valid source of knowledge. But, we rely on the say-so of others. And I don't want to get into it. It's such a long discussion. But, watch the lecture. I think you'd enjoy it. But one thing I wanted to add is don't conflate direct observations with science. Like as Bertrand Russell said, science is observations and our reasoning upon those observations to find the links, if you like, and any connections between them. A direct observation is not science. So when somebody says, oh, science that is factual, because when I see the moon, it's round. I know the moon is round. Well, that's not really science. That's you just mirrored your observations, right? Right. And that's the point. People conflate that sometimes. They conflate the scientific theories with just one direct observation. They're not the same thing. They're two different things. But anyway, there's much more to get into when it comes to science and does it lead to atheism. But that lecture's up now, so just enjoy it.
This one is called "Has Science Killed Religion and Does Science Lead to Atheism?"
That's the one.
That one was on Digital Member.
Can you get me that link? I will put in the episode description.
Of course.
Well, I know this sounds like I don't want to promote my own stuff, but Digital Member are very popular. They took it from my one.
Okay, gotcha.
Humble little. I have like 3 videos. Miskeen.
Oh man.
Hamza Tzortzis YouTube channel. If you just type in Hamza Andreas Tzortzis, my YouTube channel comes up, inshallah.
Okay.
Final, last, lighthearted question. If you could be any Alp, who would it be? Do you watch Ertuğrul? The show on Netflix, the Turkish show everyone's talking about?
No, there's a huge buzz about it. My friend actually bought the hat from eBay as well.
He's too busy, bro.
But
man, you gotta watch the show, man.
I don't really watch TV.
And nobody watches TV until they want to watch, until they see the show.
It'll be that's what they say. But you know what? I haven't watched it, so I can't answer the question.
You know how he relaxes and he unwinds when he's
watching boxing, right?
By that secondary, you ever seen those videos of him punching the punching bag, bro?
Oh,
mashallah, he's a beast, bro. That's how he vents, isn't that right, bro?
Actually, I train boxing.
Mashallah.
And diet as well. I tell you, really, I'm not an ideological vegan in any shape or form, by the way. I'm just trying it out, and I've been reading a book called How Not to Die. Not that I want to know how not to die, which is impossible, by the way.
You've been talking to Muhammad Gilan.
Yeah,
he's an ardent vegan.
The problem with Dr. Gilan's article, I think, was that he didn't suggest that we create halal ways of having organic, ethical meat. That was the only problem. But I with most of it, I agreed with it, because if you think about it, just ask us a question. Would the Prophet ﷺ eat meat that was injected with these poisons? I don't know. I don't think so. I find it very difficult to say that he would. Would the Prophet ﷺ slaughter meat that was treated and these animals were treated in a barbaric and inhumane way. I don't know. I find it very difficult that he would do so.
Yeah.
So supporting such a system and such a whatever.
Yeah.
Would it be in the highest? Would it be in line with Islamic ethics? I don't know. I find it very difficult. So therefore, the vegan diet is probably the most ethical from an Islamic point of view. But it's not the kind of ideological veganism which basically says that animal life and human life are the same kind of thing, and that intrinsically eating animal meat is unethical. That would be, for me, haram. You could never say such a thing. Right? That'd be wrong.
Yeah.
Because we have our own spiritual understanding of animals. That the animals are Muslim. An animal has been designed to be at service to the human being, and when it gets sacrificed in the proper way, in the most humane way, in the most spiritual way, that animal is at sakina. They have peace. That a Muslim and the animal has now become part of another Muslim to give him energy to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And one other proactive point I think is, instead of going full vegan, is that just learn how to hunt, man. Just start hunting, dude, or go with somebody that hunts, dude.
Yeah. But there's a lot of pressure on, at least in the United States, there's a lot of pressure on a lot of these places that raise cattle and other animals that to treat them humanely, and they've gotten a lot better about it. I don't think it's as bad as it was a few years ago.
For example, chicken in America, I believe, a quarter of a chicken breast has enough salt in it for your whole day. That's a quarter of a chicken breast.
Wow.
Now, that's sodium because
they plump them up to make them weigh more.
And God knows what other poisons exist in our meat. So, look, the point is, Allah says halal, eat the halal and the tayyib, and the pure and the good things, right?
Yeah.
If we have that ethical principle, then generally speaking, you should be eating more whole foods, grains, nuts, vegetables, fruits, dates, for example. And if you can get your milk from cows that are organic, that haven't been injected with hormones, that don't have all these medicines and poisons in them, and the cow hasn't been treated inhumanely, forced. Sometimes they over what do you call it, milk the cow, and it damages the cow.
Yeah.
You can find a cow like that and do it. There's a farm in Oxford, amazing farm. It's called Willowbrook Farm. It's done by amazing Muslim family. I think a lot of them are converts to Islam. And they treat their animals, I've been there, I camped there. They treat the animals as if the family. And it's organic, they treat them with respect, it's part of the family. It's really, really nice. So I would say you could source your meat from there, but it will be more expensive, which is good. Because we overeat, man. We overeat. Wallahi, the Prophet said the worst thing you could feel is the worst vessel you could feel is the stomach.
Yep.
And there is a spiritual, read Al-Ghazali's book, one of his books in his Ihya, which is on breaking the two desires, the sexual desire and your stomach, overeating. And it's a very severe thing, but our Muslim community, one of our biggest vices is overeating. Even du'at, with all due respect, some du'at and speakers are just fat, man.
Yeah, man. So, absolutely. I always say that. And I remember when I was young, I'd say, you're talking about, my bad habits, look at you, it was.
Look, benefit of the doubt, some people may have genetic issues, hormonal issues. Notwithstanding that, generally speaking, we have an unhealthy appetite, that we excessively eat too much meat. The Prophet was a quasi-vegetarian. And we're not healthy anymore. Many marriages fail because of this. I know this sounds very shallow.
No, it's true.
We live in a hypercivilized world, right? I had a sincere, practicing not elderly, but he was older than me, brother. He couldn't tell his wife about his problems he's had with her for 15 years, which was about her weight. And it's made him really think about his marriage in a very dark, serious way. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay, fine. They should improve the communications, that's for sure. And the way they speak to each other, and they should be more open. And, there's a sensitivity. But I'm a little bit more, we break plates at weddings. That's what Greeks do. So I'm a little bit more straight. I'll be like, excuse me, there's an issue here. I'm going to help you. Yeah. Because, this is important. And, we overeat, we overeat, and it's a sign, it's a spiritual disease, man.
Try this. I mean, I'm not sure if you're already trying this, but if the listeners want to try this idea of intermittent fasting, just realize how little your body needs food by trying this diet where you just basically drink water? Shaykh Amir can explain it much faster than I can. How long do you do it for?
Some days, I mean, I tried at first something called the warrior diet, where you have a 4-hour eating window and you fast for 20 hours. It's actually not that difficult, because if you have your last meal at 8 p.m. at night, you wake up in the morning, have a nice glass of water, get ready for work, and your first meal at lunchtime, which is at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock maybe, you fasted for 17 to 18 hours without even trying. And sometimes I just come back home and eat. I don't really eat all day. So that way I have like a 4-hour, 5-hour, 6-hour eating window.
So he told me about this, and I was first skeptical. I'm like, oh man, this might be really hard. But within a few days, you realize
the hunger pains go away.
Yeah, yep. You don't need that much food.
And if you're short on energy, you could just have black coffee, man. You'll be all good.
And then, when I break my fast, I eat regular food. Like, I don't even think about carbs or anything. I just eat whatever I want, and I don't have to.
And you get full really fast that way, too. And you don't even want to eat after that.
Exactly.
So you end up eating like one meal a day. And one of the best ways to do it, because I know you work out, and I'm telling you, my PRs, my best records I've ever broken have been in Ramadan. But I work out right before iftar.
My days, me too. Like, for example, my strongest deadlift was in a state of fasting.
Me too. Deadlift too, exactly. The strongest deadlift I ever did was in Ramadan.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Exactly.
I don't want to come across that, we know it all on this food stuff. Look, I have many shortcomings, yeah. But I think my final advice on this food issue is, let's just be a little bit more ethical, more Quranic in terms of our food, more spiritual, filling our stomachs, one of our vices. Yeah. And to summarize this, from the Muslim community point of view, I went to a local canteen next to the office, and it was a Muslim brother, Afghani. And I said to him, oh, bro, I'm trying vegan food. He looked at me. He looked at me, a vegan diet. He looked at me with almost hate. But he was like, but he said? He replied by saying, oh, and it looks like you're going to be leaving Islam soon as well. Bro, I couldn't catch my breath. I was like, oh my God. And then I explained to him what I meant about, I don't want the poisons in it. It's not to do, the fact that I don't like meat or it's haram or anything. Of course not. And we should be more ethical. And then he got the point. But, we have this thing about meat, right? We overeat too much.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. I need to go.
Yes. Yes.
Wallahi,
we're way over time now.
Okay, but one last question before we leave. What do you think about the Habib Nurmagomedov fight against what's his name? What's his name again? Who's fighting?
I can't remember.
Do you watch UFC at all?
I do. Yeah, I'm actually gonna probably watch it in the weekend.
Right. Yes. Who do you got? Who do you got on that fight? Habib or?
Well, it has to be Habib. I've been following him on Instagram. There's some good Islamic one, so we support the brother.
All right,
of course.
Anthony Joshua fight. So that was an interesting fight. Anthony Joshua.
He's going to be rematching with what's the name, Deontay Wilder soon, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think Deontay Wilder might get him. He's got longer, and he could bridge the gap.
I think AJ got this, man.
You know what? AJ is really good. And he learns, he progresses really well.
He's still very young.
I thought Parker might be him because he has some shortcomings and mistakes, but he covered them all up in this fight. He was really good defensively with his jab, with his right hand up, even with his movement, although he needs to improve with his angles and movements a bit. But you know what? I think he was going to be in the game for, I think, even the next 10, 12 years.
Oh, yeah. He's very young still, man.
Yeah.
Humble. And he's got good brothers. He's got good Muslim brothers around him. So, alhamdulillah.
All right. The Divine Reality is available on Amazon. Do you have any preferred vendors, Brother Hamza?
No, I mean, a lot of you could get 30% of the book off my website anyway.
Okay.
Those are free. The essays, a lot of the essays are there.
Beautiful.
So yeah.
So
Allah bless you.
Go to the website. What's it called? HamzaTzortzis.com. I'll include a link in the description. Make sure you guys check it out. Brother Hamza, thank you so much for coming on. Thank
awesome
you for giving us your precious time.
And emotional, may Allah bless you.
For questions, comments, and concerns, you can email us at themadmamluks@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure you follow us on YouTube follow subscribe button. If we get 1,000, we'll start considering putting these episodes on video format for you guys. So there's an incentive for you. All right, for our guest, Shaykh Hamza, and my co-host, Shaykh Amir Saeed, my name is Sim. Assalamu alaikum.